Welcome to Giving an Answer, the show dedicated to defending the historic Christian faith. I am your host, Mitzi Felder, and today the topic is thinking philosophically about sex. And to discuss this with me, I have Mitzi Fields, and let me tell you about Mitzi. Mitzi has a bachelor's degree in education from Iowa State University. She has a master's in apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary. We've actually been in class together. I remember Mitzi very well. She's a speaker and teacher on issues relating to Christian apologetics, and she's also a member of the National Apologetics Training Center located here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome to the show, Mitzi.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So let's just go ahead and just get right to it.
Sure.
What do you even mean by thinking philosophically about sex? What does that even mean?
Okay. To put it, the short answer is to think about it from the perspective of natural law and reason. To think philosophically about sex is to basically divorce the emotional sides of sexuality, divorce the biblical sides of it. Not completely, that's impossible, since God is ultimately the designer of sexuality, but not everybody is a devoted Christ follower. And so that's why I think it's good that we look at it from a philosophical standpoint to find a common ground, a non-religious common ground with people in our society. So I think that's, it's different from looking at it from a biblical standpoint,
right.
But that really only reaches people who abide by biblical standards.
Right.
And many people in our culture don't.
Right.
So that's where the common ground comes in.
And that's important because I've done shows on thinking about sex biblically. It's a Christian show, so that's not surprising. But your point is well taken, because as Christians, we may not be speaking to another Christian about this topic. And sometimes if you talk to someone who's not a Christian and you start quoting the Bible, they'll automatically shut down.
Right.
But if you start saying, well, let's use reason and think about this philosophically, then some people may be more open to receive what you're saying. So that's very good.
Yeah, and I think it's good too that we are reflective about our choices in life, not just about sexuality, just about anything. Because if we're not careful, if we want to live a life of integrity and be careful about our choices, it's going to have a good effect on us and as well as our families, our friends, our immediate environment, as well as our society as a whole. If we don't reflect on life and are careless with our choices, especially with sexuality, because it's so personal, and it hits right to the soul. And we'll get into that in a minute, I'm sure, but it can really have damaging effects. And what's so scary about that is those effects are very subtle, and we don't see what it's doing to us until we come to a certain point and we look back and try to find out where we went wrong with our choices. Right. So here we are now, and then, you know, it just has kind of a ripple effect in our society. And so that's when you have an entire society making poor choices about sexuality, since that's our topic, then we end up damaging our entire social unit.
Right.
So,
Now, you may have touched on this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Why is it important to even think philosophically about sex?
I think, again, it's important to, if we care at all about truth, if we care at all about the right way of doing things, about morality. I said before, not everybody is a devoted Christ follower, but most people are moral people, and they want what's right, what's best for them and for other people. So I think it's important because to have the proper perspective on something is going to affect the way you make your decisions. So if we don't think about sexuality from a philosophical standpoint and we make those careless choices, then there again, we wonder where we went wrong and how did we end up where we are today.
So how does our culture devalue sex?
I think our culture treats, in a nutshell, it treats sex as if it had no meaning. Now, many may disagree with me on that, but if we unpack that a little bit, our culture has shifted in the past 40 to 50 years towards a more public display of sexuality. Things that we see in magazines and on TV, musical lyrics, everyday topics of conversation wouldn't be thought of, at least not as common as they were back in the 1950s. Cohabitation has increased significantly since the 1970s, and all of that is a result of our perspective of sexuality. I think also it devalues because we're not paying attention to the importance of marriage, the importance of a whole family unit. And it's just, it over time has damaging effects. We're seeing it now to where because of this shift, because of the continuing shift towards a more open and public display of sexuality, there you start getting into unnatural relations of sexuality. The most common one today is homosexuality. And now we have some states that have legalized homosexual marriage. And so now conservatives and everyone really were faced with the question, what is marriage? Which is a question we never really had to answer many years ago. So,
right. Do you know, is there one event that happened that made us take this shift, or is it just something that's just gradually has been chipping away at the fabric of our culture?
I think I think the latter is probably the better explanation. I can't really point to one specific event, but I think it's just, I would even venture to say that the rise in divorce has sort of devalued marriage, and so thereby devaluing the importance of sexuality within a marriage unit. And there's so many components that come together when they're all together and just carrying on throughout time, and in increasing numbers. I think it just continues to develop, and yeah, the culture is really pushing for their own agendas and free speech, and I think there's really no one event.
Right.
It's more just everybody as a whole working together. I would say probably the sexual revolution, if I had to point to a specific time frame, that would probably be it, where the change occurred.
Yeah, I think the 60s. I remember, and I'm dating myself, but maybe not, because you can look at this on TV today.
Yeah.
But looking at shows like I Love Lucy and Leave It to Beaver, it shows back in that era where if they showed a bedroom scene, they were sleeping in separate beds.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, even though we all knew that they slept in the same bed,
Yeah.
but I guess just for modesty's sake, they did not show them sleeping in the same bed. And now we've come to, and it hasn't been that long. The 50s really hasn't, I guess, like I said, I wasn't around in the 50s, but I've seen the 50s shows, and just to see what we've come to, it's been shocking what 50 or 60 years have done.
Right, I would agree. And now I've noticed a lot of shift towards, I say the homosexual agenda because that's been a very hot topic in our culture, in American culture today. More and more shows are coming out with either a homosexual character, or innuendos, or this is something that, and not to harp on only homosexuality, but just sexuality in general. It's very difficult to find a show that doesn't even mention friends sleeping together or trying to hook up, as it were. So it's definitely prevalent on
like
our
the
TV shows.
The whole friends with benefit thing.
Yes.
That is like, and I watch, well, my wife would say I watch too much court TV. But it's interesting because you can sort of get a snap of what's going on in culture. But you would have people who would say, would come into court and they would talk about how they just have a friend who they sleep with, but that's just it.
That's it.
They just sleep with them. I mean, it's not like there's no relationship, no bond at all. It's just, we would just, every now and then we just have sex, just friends just having sex.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that goes back to how our culture devalues sex because they see it that way. They see sex as having no meaning. They may not say it that way, but let's look at sexuality instead of just a casual recreational way. We look at other ways that sex is misused. We look at homosexuality, for one, we've been discussing, but what about sex trafficking and rape and child sexual abuse and pornography, even masturbation, and I would include bestiality. People are shocked when they hear these things. They want justice for the child that's been sexually abused. They want justice for the woman that's been raped. And people they find these things abhorrent. And those responses scream that sex does have meaning. So what is that meaning is really what we're trying to drive at. When it's done between, casual partners, it's fine, but why is it all of a sudden wrong when it's done, in the case of rape or sex trafficking? So if we're going to discuss the topic of sexuality outside of the bonds of marriage, we have to discuss all of it, not just one aspect of it.
And that leads me to my next question. How would you define sex and what is it really for?
I think sex is complete self-giving of two people, complementary people, man and woman, of their entire being, which by that I mean body and soul. It is, when they engage in sex, it is one unitary action. It's a union between a husband and wife. As far as what it's really for, I would say, before we can really even discuss that, it's good to discuss the proper function of sexuality.
Okay.
Every natural thing has a proper function. The human heart has a proper function to it, to pump blood and carry nutrients throughout the body. Now, you can't extract the heart and transplant it lower in the body and expect it to function as a liver. The heart's not designed to function that way.
Right.
A car is not designed to run on water or orange juice. It's designed to run on fuel. And so sex is no different when it comes to the proper function of it. And the proper function of sexuality is set up to where it's meant to function rightly within a very simple yet a very narrow set of circumstances, which is two people, man and woman, are married in the marriage unit. Now that may sound very narrow-minded, but if you really think about it, there's a lot of things in life where we really do want a narrow set of circumstances. For example, when you go to a doctor and you're sick, you want one answer. You don't want a myriad of possibilities of what you could have. No, you want to know exactly what you have so that you know how to treat it.
Right.
And sex is similar in regards to there's one right way to have a sexual union with somebody, and that's within the bonds of marriage. It cuts out homosexuality, it cuts out cohabitation, masturbation, etc. But that's really the only way it's meant to function. Reason being is because our bodies function as one organism. You can walk and breathe and digest food all on your own with no help from anyone else. I can do the same. The only function that the body has that needs a counterpart is the reproductive function. And so when a husband and wife come together and they have that union through sexual intercourse, they are in that moment literally functioning as one organism. That's why it's stated in the scriptures as a 2-in-1 flesh union. And there you also have the potential to bring about a third person through procreation.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, what happens when people have sex outside of marriage?
There, ultimately you find self-alienation. It's a mere illusory experience. It's an artificial experience of a two-in-one flesh union. What people do when they have sex with somebody who is not their spouse is essentially they're trying to create a union with someone who that can't happen because there's no commitment there. There's no spouse, really. And so you end up fragmented. I think if you were to ask, especially women, because women can be very emotional about sex, whereas men are more on the physical end of things. When you have sex with somebody who's not your spouse, and the relationship ultimately doesn't work out, you feel disconnected, you feel shame, you might feel guilt. These are all possibilities. Well, that's because you're treating your body in a way that's not designed to be treated. It's not meant to be treated this way. To have sex just casually without any commitment to the person. And so you end up fragmented. You feel alienated. You feel it's a mere illusion to some degree.
And that's interesting because when you look at the media, especially women now, women are supposed to be becoming more and more aggressive and more and more forward when it comes to sex. They're more and more like the on the prowl.
Yeah.
And the message more commonly is that women are treating sex as something casual, as men have done supposedly throughout the centuries.
Right. And I think that's where the media, the shows, the magazines, the music, and the whole 9 yards, movies, can really have a damaging effect on people, because people look at these shows and they read the magazines and they think this is real, like this can really happen. You know, I can have sex and it's not going to mean anything. And that, in reality, is really not the case. I think the media paints this picture like it's, the friends with benefits is a great way to live your life. It's just, in reality, it's really not. It's damaging.
It's interesting because they will show two uncommitted people having hot, steamy sex, like this really, really passionate sex. And I hardly ever see them showing married people having sex.
Right. I've noticed that too.
I don't get it. Married people don't have sex, yet the people who aren't committed are having the best sex. If you let the media be our guide, that's the message that I'm getting from it.
And that's what a lot of people take as their guide. And because there's so much media in our it's right in front of our face everywhere we turn. You have to search to find what the truth is, really. And you find that through the scriptures, you find that through just really understanding like this entire topic, really understanding the right perspective and the right way to view sexuality.
So what do you say to someone who says that, sex is okay between people who love each other, who are committed to one another, may not be married, but they love each other and they're committed. What's wrong with that?
Well, my first knee-jerk reaction would be, well, then get married. What's holding you back from, if you're really that devoted to each other? What's holding you back from just getting married? But I understand the question. And I would say that if all it takes is to have an honest, open relationship with healthy sex acts between two people, then we could say, in theory, that there's really nothing wrong with prostitution. If it's just two consenting adults getting together, having safe sex, one is paid, one is gratified, then what's wrong with it? And so I think that doesn't diminish the damaging effects side of it, the self-alienation, the illusion of this artificial 2-in-1 flesh union. It doesn't minimize that only because you are in a relationship between boyfriend and girlfriend that are devoted to one another and you love each other, and I would say just go ahead and get married if that were the case.
Right.
You know.
And it's interesting too because you're so in love with this person, especially when you're a teenager, and then 10 years from now you may not remember that person's name.
Right.
But you may have given that person something that you could never get back.
That's right.
Something that could have been so special to your spouse.
Yeah.
But you gave it away to someone who you really didn't even know that well.
Exactly.
You were caught up in emotions and temporary feelings.
That's right. And to give your heart away is one thing in a relationship. To give your body away takes it to a whole new level of personality, of something so personal to a person that you're right, you can't ever get it back. And I've even heard it said, and to a large degree I agree, that each time you have sex with somebody who is not your spouse, you're giving a piece of your soul away to each one of those people, because you have had a kind of union with them that is only meant to function properly within the marriage bond, that is only meant for your spouse.
Right.
And so when you mistreat it that way, again, you end up fragmented.
I remember having a discussion with my daughter, and I use this analogy. I said, picture your body as a beautiful vase that's on a pedestal. Pristine, clean. Don't let someone come with dirty hands grabbing on that beautiful vase.
Right.
I mean, so if you think of yourself, because we are vessels, and if you think of yourself that way, then hopefully, you can make that distinction.
Yeah.
And but
Your dad.
I'm dad.
Yeah.
Because I don't know anything.
Right.
Because and I've been there before too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've told people this story. It's part of my testimony actually. When I was in my younger youth, I was a non-believer. I was a professing atheist, and I was an atheist because I wanted to live life the way I wanted to live it.
Right.
I didn't want to be held accountable to anyone, and a lot of that had to do with sex. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
A lot of that had to do with sex. So God did what Scripture says He does. He gives us over to our desires. He gave me over to my desire, and I was a whoremonger.
Yeah.
And when I became a believer, God actually worked with me in that area. God cleansed me and showed me what sex was supposed to be. And it's interesting because I went from being a whoremonger to a person who was celibate for 10 years.
Yeah.
I was celibate until my wedding night. But now, it's like, it was like, have you heard the thing about the second virginity? People talk about a second virginity when you've completely changed your life and you've completely put behind your past and you're focusing on the future. And that's sort of what I felt like when I got together with my wife, because it had been 10 years.
Yeah.
So I know that God can do it. And that's one of the things that I do want to make clear to people who are listening to this, is because we live in a society that says that, you're going to explode if you don't have sex on a regular basis. You weren't meant to go 9 months or a year without sex. Well, no, I did it for 10 years. I'm not going to say it was easy.
Right.
But I did it for 10 years.
Right.
So you can do it. And the reward is worth it.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. Yeah, and I would say, human beings are sexual beings. From birth to death, we are sexual beings. And so it's not wrong to have these desires. Of course, it's very natural to have these desires. But where the challenge comes in is that very simple, specified set of circumstances. Again, if you want it to function properly, you're not going to explode. Now, as far as biologically speaking, you can't ever get your virginity back. Now,
Right.
I do believe that God can cleanse you of that, because, if we're speaking in physical terms, having sex with a bunch of different people that is not your spouse, and you may not know, what kind of diseases they carry
Right.
and so forth. Your risk, just speaking from a health standpoint, raises to increased risk of STDs and the possibility of being a single parent and things of that nature. So if we're talking about damaging effects, that could also be, not to say that children, but raising a child on your own can be extremely difficult
Right.
for you and for the child,
Right.
not having the father or the mother around. And so, yeah, I wanted to make that point that it's not wrong to have those sexual desires. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
Because we are sexual beings. God created us that way.
And I remember when I was single and celibate, I remember saying, God, take these desires away from me. And
Yeah.
then someone said to me, no, you don't want that.
Right.
Those desires are good.
They are.
You just
They
have
are.
to act on them in a proper context.
You have to control them.
You have to
Yes.
control them. And that's what separates us from animals.
Yes.
We are moral creatures, and because we're moral creatures, we can decide what we're going to do. We can
Right.
decide, we can control our emotions, we can control our desires, we can control our feelings. That is why we are higher than the other animals.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but going to the next question, how do you respond to someone who says, well, you have to sleep with someone before you marry them to know whether or not you're sexually compatible? I hear that a lot. On
Sexually
the media.
compatible.
You have to know if you're sexually compatible. Maybe y'all don't click.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
you need to know that you click before you get married.
Yeah. That's a big buzzword or a big buzz phrase, sexually compatible. Honestly, Harold, I really don't know what that means. I think I know what they mean by that. But if we're talking about sexual compatibility, he has the parts, she has the complementary parts. You're sexually compatible. I think if you're ready to give your entire self to somebody physically, I think even before that is on the table, you have to be compatible in a whole lot of other areas before that even comes up. And if you love somebody enough to vow to them that you are going to live with them and cherish them and love them and respect them and be with them for your entire life, the sexual part of it, you will work out. Even if you're not compatible in the beginning, you will work that out. And a lot of that, especially with inexperienced people, that comes with time.
Yes.
I think that, when you put it in perspective, that's very low on the totem pole there.
But believe it or not, we've actually come to the end of the show.
Really?
So I'm
Okay,
going to have to end it on that note, Mitzi.
All right.
I want to thank you, Mitzi, for joining me,
Thank you,
talking with me
Harold.
about
Yes.
thinking philosophically about sex. And that will end this episode of Giving an Answer. Be sure to join me again next time. And until then, goodbye and God bless. You can find out more about Giving an Answer, as well as listen to other episodes by visiting us online at www.givinganAnswer.org.